waste his time. And Bob's told that same story. He would be the worst guy in the world to make up a lie and trying to perpetuate a lie. He's too busy being productive doing other things. I mean, he would be the worst guy to include that type of endeavor.
One of the threads that's out now, and we're going to cover some ground where the controversy still rages over whether he's a legit guy or not, whether there really was a program like this out there. Something I saw on Above Top Secret, a thread, just saw it yesterday, talking about Papoose Lake, and these guys theorize that since they cannot see any roads on their Google shots of Papoose Lake leading from Groom down to Papoose, therefore there was never a facility there. You want to tackle that one, John?
Yeah. Google is monitored by the Department of Defense, and every sensitive area is airbrushed. And if you don't believe that, just go to the Nevada test site. There's a huge new facility called Sandia. There's 2 huge new runways. It's about a third of the way from Tonopah Test Range to Groom Lake. Many of my friends have been there. Many of the people work there, and there's nothing visible on Google. Go to Wake Island or Johnston Island or Midway Island, where the military has a huge presence now, and all there is just plain sand and stuff, and there's huge operations out there. And so all of this stuff, anybody that thinks they're using Google and can find out any information, all the good stuff is airbrushed out.
Well, I remember seeing satellite photos where you could see roads out there. In fact, I've got one hanging on my wall right now. I'm pretty sure that guys who have worked at Area 51, who've come forward, who've talked about, and they don't buy the saucer story, but they said that there were other kinds of test flights out at Papoose, that they've used it for a number of years.
Yeah, in 1990 they moved the real sensitive stuff up north, just south of Wendover. And you got those maps I sent you?
Yeah, so you think that they, as a result of this story breaking, that they moved all the sensitive stuff somewhere else?
I think it was already being built at that time, but they did move it all up there. It's out the Wendover, or just to the east of Highway 93 alternate. And I have friends that work there, and it's really a huge facility, and it's very, very secret. It's the new Area 51, but, it's 20 years old now.
And so, George, I think it's naive. I mean, what year was it you won the Emmy Award for UFOs, the Best Evidence, a 2-hour UFO special? I don't know if people elsewhere would know. People in Las Vegas that were around then would know that. And by that next year, they were taking tour buses out to Central Nevada, so it would be naive to think that they kept doing disc tests on Wednesday night after dark, after essentially the entire world was informed of it. That program was definitely moved. This is what's funny about.
Well, I tell you what, hold that thought, because when we come back, we'll get into discussing how Area 51 story went across the world like a tsunami. Stay with us for our conversation with Gene Huff and John Lear. Beatles take us into the break. Welcome back, everyone. We're talking about the Area 51 story, and I know the broad strokes of this story are well known to many of our listeners who are wondering why we're covering the same stuff. And what I had hoped with this conversation with Gene Huff and John Lear is that we fill in some of the blanks, and that is the small stuff that happened. The broad strokes are well known. The story has gone all over the world, of course. It's the small stuff, the details about the trips out there to see the saucers that I think are important in the chain of evidence about the story. The point being, how did Bob know? If he's a fraud, as many people believe, and they have some reasons to believe that, how did he know the test flights would take place on Wednesday nights? Because the witnesses, 2 of whom we're talking to tonight, went out there, they videotaped it, they saw it, it really did happen. How did he know? There are many questions that have been raised about his academic credentials, and we'll get into some of that as well. But it's the small stuff and what the people who were directly involved with Bob lived through that I think is very telling. And every day I get inquiries about the Area 51 story, and I'm sure you guys do too, from a whole new round of folks out there who've just discovered the Area 51 story and are curious about it, which is part of the reason we're covering this. What I'd like to go into for the next couple of minutes is what it was like during that time period, because it was a tumultuous time A lot of things were going on. You guys lived through it. I lived through some of it, and it was there were some strange things that really were happening, which the people who don't believe the story and don't want to accept it have hard times accepting. Gene, why don't you start it off? I mean, you were really close to Bob. You lived through it. You know what happened in the months and years afterward. Why don't you just give me a general sense of what it was like then?
Well, after he went on television, and did we get that far yet, I guess?
No, we haven't got that far.
I just see where we're at here. Well, first of all, he was destroyed. Eventually, Tracy left, and Bob was a broken man. I mean, borderline suicidal. He was just literally physically sick, and he was destroyed emotionally. So now, look what he's gone through. He's gone from, being in between scientific jobs, working at Los Alamos, running a little photo processing lab out of his home, amongst the many other projects. I mean, Bob's a productive guy. He's always doing something with science and technology, jet cars, things like that. And he goes and gets into this program, gets exposed to alien hardware, gets caught, gets kicked out of the program, loses his wife. I mean, he was a broken man. I mean, he really felt he had nothing left to live for at that point in time. Yet the heat was still on when they called him and demanded that he report back out to work, and he told them no. Well, now not only were there clicks on all of our phone lines, he started being followed. One time he went to work out at a gym with Shelley Ball, who is Jim Taliani's significant other, the guy that we mentioned before, worked out at Tonopah Test Range, and Bob owned an Uzi, and not full automatic, but semi-automatic Uzi, and they went in and worked out at the gym. When they come out, the doors to Bob's car standing wide open, and they'd rifled through the papers in there, yet the Uzi is still sitting there on the floor. So if it was just some punks who broke into his car, they certainly would have stolen that Uzi. Instead, his car is just left with the doors standing wide open, his gun still in there. Things like that happened. I'd be at my appraisal office. We were all not carrying guns, that would have been illegal, but there were guns at the the buildings we were at that point in time, and Bob would stop by on his photo route. I'd be sitting there doing real estate appraisal. He'd come in with his face all red and say, give me your gun, and I'd hand him a gun, and he'd go back out in his car. There'd be people chasing him around. When he was getting on Highway 15 one time, a government-looking vehicle with blacked-out windows pulled up next to him and was chasing him, and they pulled up next to him. The window rolled down, and they shot his tire out.
That's the night he stayed over at my place, slept on the couch because he was scared to go home.
Right, he didn't want to go back to his house, and he came home the one night, and his entire house had been rifled through. The front door had been broken open, the deadbolt had been broken open, and people had looked through his house and left the door ajar and everything messed up. So not only were they after him, they wanted him to be paranoid. They wanted him to know that they were listening to his phone and that they were following him. So didn't
they write something on his blackboard or something like that, or erase something, or?
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember specifically what it was, but there were a whole host of paranoid situations that Bob was going through, and he was in no shape. He was out there on the edge anyway. It was a bad time in his life.
And John, you remember this time period. People who weren't there, didn't live through it, have a hard time accepting that it was real, but it was real for those who were living it.
Yeah, it was real, and when you come to the realization that yes, there are aliens, they are visiting. The government does interact with them. We do have access to their technology. I mean, it's something that it takes you a few months to get used to.
And, there were other things that we didn't cover here, George, like when Bob was in the program, he was told that there were one guy that worked as one of the scientists out at S4 didn't show up for work for a night or two, and they were on the lookout for him, and I guess they sent guys from the OFI to try and find him, and the word was that the Russians were in Las Vegas trying to bribe people for information of what was going on at S4. And at this point in time, Dennis Mariani, who was, again, the security guy who shadowed Bob to and from work, took Bob to the police substation over on St. Louis, down by St. Louis and Eastern Avenue, and registered his gun. Bob had moved here from New Mexico, and he had that Uzi, and he had a .44 Magnum and another small